Everyday Enneagram. This is Pastor Jason, and I'm here today with my good friend, Melissa Bezotte. We're going to be exploring what it looks like to be an Enneagram type as a therapist, as she discovers and kind of walks through her journey and uncovering what her type is. So, hey, why don't you introduce yourself, Melissa? It's so great to have you here. You're one of my favorite people in the world. I absolutely love you. So why don't you share just a little bit about yourself, what you do, and let's get this party started.
Sure. So as you said, my name is Melissa Bezotte. I live in Rosemount, Minnesota, which is where I met Jason. We just discovered 13 years ago, which seems like forever ago. I have 3 children, and my husband's name is Joe. And I own Living Water Christian Counseling, which is a Christian counseling center in Eagan, Minnesota. So we do online work, and then we also do in-person work, of course. I have a couple of therapists that work for me. And so together we serve individuals, families, couples, just about everyone. So I opened up Living Water Christian Counseling about 12 years ago. Yeah. And I actually now am the founder of the Inspire Collective, which is a coaching membership for women of faith who want to move from stuck to free emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So what I realized is that as a therapist working with people for so long, I wanted to be able to magnify or multiply what I do. Yeah. And you find when you get a group of women together, we're all so similar and we're all working through the same issues. And so this is an easy way to impact more women's lives, but also the idea that they're in a community together makes it even more important because they can identify with each other and we can all kind of walk through healing at the same time. So that's what I do in business, a little bit of my personal life.
That's awesome. When we actually met when I was a pastor at Community of Hope, and actually a little before that. Mm-hmm. And you've always had a heart for women and seeing women kind of grow. You were part of a women's ministry team that we launched a women's ministry together. Yeah, you and me and a couple other friends.
Yeah.
So when you started this, I know one of the things because you started off as a school counselor, right?
Yeah.
You were at Hastings, if I remember correctly, Hastings High School.
I was in Hastings High School at the time. Yep. Spent 7 years working there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you made that transition, because I remember walking through with you on that as you were praying and processing about what was next. And you had just had this idea of the Living Water Christian Counseling Center. What was part of that step? And I think this is going to be helpful because you're actually still trying to figure out your Enneagram type, right?
Yeah.
And you
figured out who I am still at 47.
And that's okay. And you've actually you're rather new to the Enneagram. You've had some conversations around it, and you and I earlier were talking about you actually had some hesitancy with the Enneagram, and we'll get to that. But I'd love for you to share when you were making that decision, what made you want to step out from as a school counselor to going out into starting your own practice? Because there's a level of calling and boldness and a lot of uncertainty. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Sure. And I do think it was probably 3 things. The first thing was I had done a Christian counseling certification program. And so it was through the American Association of Christian Counselors. And so I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in counseling. And so I worked in the secular field for, over 10 years as a school counselor. And so as I started to get more involved in women's ministry, as I started to just explore the Christian aspect or the biblical aspect of counseling, it was really hard for me to not just do Christian counseling. I felt like I was cheating people or I was lying to people, not being able to talk about like the Bible and God and, really the fundamental piece to healing. So really that was, I felt like everybody needed to know who God was. And I was able to do that in the school that I worked in, which was amazing because it's just an amazing community, and I would say a very Christian community. And so, had a lot of support, at the school. But anyway, so as I said, I have 3 children. My son, Axton, I became pregnant with my son, Axton. And as you know, my husband travels just about every week overseas. Yeah. And so what that means is that with 3 kids, it was going to be pretty impossible for me to be able to work full time and, take care of my family. So it was the other thing. And then the third thing, of course, at that same time, I was leading the women's ministry. My heart is for women. I had started to mentor a lot of women. Yep. And it's almost like it almost like it happened. Like it was something that it just happened and I had to trust. I had to just say, okay, like if I just, become a Christian counselor, if I become a pastoral counselor, I've got licensed and ordained as a pastor, and certified, they'll come. And so I started working at Community of Hope. And if you remember that,
Yeah.
and just in that little unused office, I remember who's Dennis, maybe Dennis's office.
It was
maybe?
either Dennis's or Renee's. It was one of them. Renee's
Dennis.
old office. Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever. Right.
Yeah.
Maybe even, yeah.
Who knows?
Anyway, so I basically said, here I am. This is what I do. And the Lord just continued to remind me. And I got that passion, and I realized that truly was my purpose. Not that I didn't love my past jobs. I love teenagers, love doing that work. But so all of that together is how Living Water started. Yeah. And I actually have a really fun story because I didn't have any money to start it. My husband's like, okay, you're not working now. And I wanted to start a new business. And he said, well, here's the deal. He said, how much do you need? I'm like, I need like $1,000, just to go through all the process of licensure and, all that. And he goes, all right, if you get $1,000, you can start Living Water Christian Counseling. And I was like, Joe, right? And he loves me. He supports everything that I do, but he's also like very, careful and secure with our finances. Yeah. Like, here's the deal. Like, if God is calling you to this, then he's probably going to supply for you. So no lie. I told you I had started this little tiny practice at Community of Hope, and this woman walks in and she says, and this woman had never really heard from the Lord before, just starting to learn about her faith and whatever. I'd worked with her just 2 times. And she said, Melissa, before we start, I need to tell you something. And I said, what? And she said, I'm supposed to give you $1,000.
Wow.
I bawled.
I remember that story. Yeah, I remember you telling me that.
And I'm like, okay, Joe, this is undeniable. And so from that point on, it was very sure that that's what I was supposed to do. So that's
awesome. Now, it's one of the reasons why I want to talk about that is as we're looking at Enneagram. And again, you're trained in therapy. I'm not a therapist. I'm a pastor. I can do biblical counseling, that kind of stuff. But this is your field. One of the things that as we're beginning to explore this is the Enneagram is really about motivations. Mm-hmm. It's far less about behavior and has more to do with about why you do what you do. Now, I think it's important for those that are watching, like many personality tests, whether it be Myers-Briggs or Strengths Finders, kind of the way I like to describe the Enneagram, and I've used this if you've ever been to any of my coaching or teaching sessions, picture a house, right? Myers-Briggs is the rooms of the house. And so, like, for instance, if you're an introvert, you're probably going to hang out in the bedroom or maybe in the bathroom, right? If you really want alone time, you're going to go in the bathroom, close the door. And then picture if you're an extrovert, you're going to hang out in the kitchen or in the living room where people are. Now, picture Strength Finders is kind of how you decorate your rooms.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
And so the Strengths Finders is the decorations of the rooms. And now let's use like DISC. DISC is how you manage your household. What's the vibe around the household? The Enneagram is the whole house.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
It's the house it's the house that you've constructed for yourself to protect yourself from the world.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's good.
And I think this is why, from a counseling perspective, you and I have had several conversations. And I actually remember when I first asked you to be a part of the women's ministry team, and you weren't sure that you were the right person for it. Do you remember that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You had to speak and lead. And I was like, oh, no way. No way.
And there were some base things. Now, one of the things that's helpful now, as of right now, the limited stuff that you've done, you think you might be a type 3 or a type 7.
And that's just based on walks with one of my neighbors.
So you have a friend who's really into the Enneagram, right?
Yeah, she loves it. And so I have that passion. Like, I'm really getting interested and intrigued by it, and how I could do my practice. And
I'll tell you from there are a lot of Christian counselors and therapists as well as business coaches. I mean, it's very popular right now. But if we look at the motivation, and this is why I wanted to start off with this story of how you came in, and part of the reason why I wanted to have you on, because I've had the privilege of watching this journey of you being an amazing school counselor where the kids loved you, where the school was sad to see you go, to watching you step into women's ministry and having to almost coax you in, like you were willing to do it because you loved me. And then trying to push you out into, hey, I want you to, let's have you teach. Let's have you lead. Let's vision together. And there's a story underneath. Now, the Enneagram is, the Enneagram, the way we use it anyways, is what's in modern personality theory is using Jungian typology. And I know you know that language as a therapist, but the idea is that we all have stories. And one of the best ways to first uncover your Enneagram, and there's a couple different tools that I'll do and I want to walk through with you on, are first the stories. And so here, let me tell you the story of the 3, and let me tell you the story of the 7. And we've got a few other things.
I don't want you to nail me yet. Like I might be a 5. I might be.
That's right.
I have no idea who I am. I know I'm not an 8.
and here's the thing. You might at this point because the Enneagram is
maybe
about,
I'm an 8.
You might maybe you are an 8. Maybe that's why you don't want to be one. I don't know. Because the goal of the Enneagram is not for me to tell you what you are. And really what makes the Enneagram a beautiful process is exactly that. It's a process. It's your self-discovery. And the job of a good Enneagram typist, someone who leads people through a typing session or a coach or a teacher, is instead of me saying, well, Melissa, I think you're this, it's really to guide along the process, much like you do in therapy, right? You're helping them uncover. You're not just telling them what their issue is.
Right. And through their narrative, so you say story, and I use narrative therapy.
So you'll love the story part. Okay. So let's talk. And there's a couple other tools that we can do as well. But because you think you're a 3 or a 7 right now, we'll kind of start here, right?
Okay.
So the narrative of the 7s are part of what's called the Head Triad. And the Head Triad, they are rooted in fear. Their mind is kind of the controlling operator for how they view the world. Now, 7s in particularly, their fear is of missing out.
Already I'm going, that's not me. Like, I'm not ruled by my fear at all. Like, I got faith, like nobody's business.
Yeah, and so let's talk. We'll tell you a little bit more about it, right? And again, there's a reason sometimes 3s and 7s actually can look very similar.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So the 7s, the fear is that first, no one's going to take care of me, so I have to take care of myself. And whenever there's a fear of threat, or if there's an emotional, if there's danger or anything that possibly is going to limit them, their gut response or their head response is to flee. It's to go to the other thing. And so 7s are sometimes called Peter Pans. I'm a 7, by the way.
I'm definitely a Peter Pan. Like, yeah.
And so what happens is the 7 is always looking for the next fun thing. But the reason why they're looking for the next fun thing is because they want to avoid the thing right now, or they don't feel like what they're in right now can satisfy.
Okay.
And so that's kind of the 7. And there's obviously more to it. I'm being very generic right now. Okay, now let's go to the 3. The 3 is part of what's called the heart type or the heart center. And they operate more from their feelings. You are a very heart person. Yeah.
Yeah.
3s tend to be the kind of the story that they learned, and understanding the story is helpful. So let me back up a second. When we talk about the story, it's the story that you learned as a child. Now, some Enneagram books will describe it as a sacred wound or the childhood wound. And that wound kind of became what helped you develop or rather revealed your personality, because your personality is the mask. The personality is not actually who you are.
Right.
It's the seat. Marilyn Vansell, in her book Self to Lose, Self-Defined, she describes as like a seed. The personality is the outer shell that's there to protect what's inside. And it's a gift. I believe our personality is a gift from the Lord. But like all things, when the gift becomes everything, it's no longer a gift, it's a curse.
Right.
So for the 7 story that they believed as a child was no one would take care of me, so I must take care of myself. For the 3, it's that I can't fail. In fact, I will be loved if I succeed. And so 3s tend to look at the world through the lens of I need to make sure that I'm as successful as possible and I will avoid failure at all cost.
Yeah, that's so hard. I feel like I could pull a little bit of each.
Yeah. So now here's why 3s and 7s, and this will also help, and let's talk a little bit about this.
I almost feel like I can see little Melissa, and then like high school Melissa, and then college Melissa, and then
Yep.
Melissa now, but when you say go back to like those, those early years, like,
So think about who you were at 20 before you learned to put on all the masks, because here's the thing.
I was way before 20. Let's talk about high school.
High school. Let's talk about 18 to 20, all that range, right?
Okay.
So one of the things that makes it difficult with the Enneagram is the older you get,
that's probably the success one.
you learn to put on different masks to protect yourself. So for instance, who you were at 20, you have an experience, you go, well, if I want to succeed, I can't act this way. So what do? You put on another type. You put on another personality, but you have that core one that's always there. That core one that has never changed. That's the deepest motivation. It's what drives everything else. And the other masks are on top of it. So when you were 20, or let's say 18, what were you like at 18, 20? Would you say that story of the three, that fear of failure, of image management, was that more of who you were?
Image management for sure. Fear of failure, not so much. I hadn't really experienced, failure. Went to college right away and, had successful friendships and whatever else. So not really the fear of failure, but fear of image. Absolutely.
Okay. And the reason why fear may not be as rooted, fear is rooted definitely for head types. For heart types, the emotional connection is sadness or shame or envy. And
sure. Oh gosh. Yeah. Those are probably my middle names. What is it? Sadness, envy, and shame?
Yeah, sadness, envy, and shame kind of. And what the three does is the three is part of what's called an anchor point. So 3, 6s, and 9s. If you look at the Enneagram, I can't tell if I'm frozen. There you are. Are we back?
That was you.
Technology. What do you do?
Shame on me.
Shame on. So imagine for a moment 3, 6s, and 9. If you look at the Enneagram, and the Enneagram is a weird looking thing. I mean, it looks like a pentagram that threw up all over itself. It's
that did creep me out a little bit too. So Per Nilsson is the one who introduced me to it. And if Per used it, I'm comfortable with it, right? Because I trust Per. And then you were the second person. I was like, okay, I'm going to not believe this is like some sort of satanic symbol. Like,
because it looks like that, doesn't it?
Just the Enneagram. Yeah. So I had to throw that in there. It's safe. If Per and Jason believe it's safe, like, we got this.
And here's the thing, it's not a Christian thing. And so there are New Age people use it, Buddhist people use it. In fact, if we look back at the Enneagram in tradition, you'll see that it might be possibly 4,000 years old. There's evidence that the Muslim mystics use it, Buddhist mystics, Christian mystics. I mean, it's kind of all over. But truth is truth.
Crazy.
And that's the beauty of it. So regardless of if it's true, that's like saying, well, math is wrong or algebra is wrong because it was started by Muslims. No, it's math, right?
It's just a modality,
That's
right? As long as Jesus is in the modality, we're good.
Oh, that's good. So say a little bit real quickly, just describe what a modality is, because I don't want to assume that everybody watching knows what you mean by modality.
Sure. So I wear a couple of hats. I'm actually also a licensed natural health practitioner, and I'm a licensed and ordained pastor. And then I'm a counselor and coach and an entrepreneur. Okay. So I believe, and I can tell you the story about how I started the Inspire Collective, but this whole process, the past 7 years or so, I've really been walking in natural health and wanting to understand, are rocks okay, when we use them for healing? Are oils okay when we use them for healing? And not even just, I've gone way farther than that now with natural health, just to understand, did God create this? Is this in the Bible? Is this something that I can, as a Christian woman, wanting to practice these things, is this something safe that I can, use? There's more. There's so many different things or modalities that I can use that I know that, fundamentally God created. I won't go through all that right now. But anyway, I see them all. Most of them are all just modalities, ways that the Lord heals. And as long as the Holy Spirit is the one doing the work, and that's the Spirit that is behind it, and I have Jesus in me, and the Spirit that I'm using is the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
So the modality is basically what's the mode of transportation for the healing?
So that's good. So the Enneagram is a great mode. It's
Right.
it's just a tool.
Modality.
Yeah. It's a tool. It's not the tool.
You're not worshiping it. It's not an idol that sits on your bedside post. It's I hope not.
We don't have Enneagram stickers that we put on stuff that Enneagram saves. Yeah.
Right. But it's a way that you bring healing to people and understanding.
Yeah, and that's great. Thank you for clarifying that. So when we look at the three, I think right now it seems like you're leaning towards the three.
We'll see. I could be a 2 for all I know.
Well, and so now that gets into a different conversation with his wings.
Yeah.
One of the ways that we also help, so we start off with story, and that story of image management. And for threes, because they're part of what's called the anchor points, 3, 6s, and 9s are, if you look at the Enneagram, they're right in between each of the other numbers. So on either side, the 3 is the 2 or the 4, and it's directly in the center. And 9, they're in between the 8 and the 1. For 6s, it's the 7 and the 5. And whenever you're in the anchor point, you're usually the least in touch with your emotional center.
Okay, that is not true about me.
Well, now let me explain that, though, because that doesn't mean you don't have emotions. It doesn't mean you're not.
No, I am so in tune.
Yeah, it's not so much about emotions. It's more about in touch. And you made a comment about earlier saying, "Well, I was never afraid of failure." And so one of the things that threes will do is they'll lose their touch with that fear of failure, that sadness of feeling their identity by what they do and not who they are. And so for the 3, their sin, which is one of the languages that we use, every type has a sin attached to it or a fixation. The sin of the 3 is deceit, but it's not lying to others, it's lying to themselves. It's also telling themselves like, well, no, I didn't fail, or they'll change the narrative so that they appeared more successful than they were. Or
I don't want mine to be that now. What's the one that doesn't have the sin issue?
They all have sin issues.
Do I sound like a 3?
Yeah. Well, I could ask Ben. We're actually here with Ben Schrady, who's also a 3.
Ben.
And Ben is actually, he's fielding our questions. Ben, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
On which part of it?
All right, now we'll keep on going.
Part of it, there's a whole lot that was just said right there.
The part about me denying now that I'm a 3 because there's sin issue. Like, I want to be perfect.
What I've said to people is I don't wish a 3 upon anybody. I don't. So when you're like, when you're like, even the comment earlier when you said, "Oh, I learned to put all those masks on way before that." That was one of those statements where I'm like, maybe you should look at the 3, you know.
I'm being psychoanalyzed. JK, I'm kidding.
So when we look at the Enneagram and the 3, because the story of the 3 is that deceit, it's not always lying about others. However, when a 3 is unhealthy, the 3s will lie to other people to appear more successful. Sometimes they'll bolster their numbers or they'll share things. But usually the deceit is internal because they're falling asleep to the sadness of the fact that too much of their value is based upon other people's view of them.
That's so sad.
And all of them, every number has that. And this is why we need Jesus in it. So when we do the Enneagram, we're not doing the
You're
Enneagram.
gonna make me cry, Jason.
We don't do the Enneagram through the lens of anything other than the gospel. So the everyday Enneagram, our thing is ultimately without Jesus. The Enneagram is a great tool, but really we want to help you see that the gospel becomes the answer, that Jesus, the work of the Holy Spirit in you, is where the transformation happens. And tools like counseling, the Enneagram, whatever else you might utilize, all those things are great resources, but they ultimately can't define you. Now, before we go any further, you and I were having a conversation earlier about some negative thoughts that you had about the Enneagram because you had some encounters, and I know you can't go into specifics, but share a little bit about what was happening when you first got introduced to the Enneagram. Let's talk a little bit about that.
So I was actually introduced to it, as I said, by a pastor friend, Pastor Pear. And again, the man's brilliant, and he probably learned it in a day, was able to use it. And so sometimes I would have him come. There's been many couples that we have worked with together, and I was working with another couple, and that's kind of when I learned it. So I started to learn it, and I started to just baby use it in practice just to understand understand who was in front of me.
Yeah.
So that's like all the training I got. Like I read a book, and so, okay, I learned it safe because I learned it from Hair, read a book, and I could start to identify maybe the numbers. And so, but I noticed when people would come in, like an individual would come in and they'd say, well, I'm an 8. And so I'm an 8. And they so in marriage counseling, they would say like, well, I'm an 8. Okay, well, I'm a 3, and it's like, they didn't want to budge. They didn't want to move. It was like using those numbers to like a label that says that now I have excuses for my behavior because I'm this, or that'd be like me saying, if I'm a 3, well, I'm a 3, I'm going to just lie to protect myself.
Yeah.
And that's okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I felt like, okay, I'm going to put a halt to this. And I didn't know enough about it until I started, as I said, talking and walking with my neighbor. And she started to open my eyes up to the fact that there's a healthy 3 and a kind of unhealthy 3. So yeah, but that's kind of how it started. It was just really this hesitation of like, I don't want to label people. Even when we do like the Myers-Briggs or we do the disc assessment, I've always used it so that I can understand who's in front of me.
Yeah.
Rather than, using it the way that I think I started to use it in practice, which didn't work for me because I was like, oh no, there's no excuses. You can change if you're an 8.
And
8 can change.
So, and here's the, I think one of the things that people, especially early on in the Enneagram, when they're first getting in, I was this way. When I like I said, I got introduced to it during my master's program. It was the very first class I took for my MDiv. But it was about 4 years ago. I had just closed a church. And I was praying, and I was pretty broken. I mean, my church closed. I lost my community.
I remember.
Yeah. And I was praying, and I just I felt like the Lord was like, Jason, remember that Enneagram thing? You should pick that up again. And I'm like, I hadn't thought about the Enneagram in years. So I started doing some research, and right around the same time, Ian Cron's book came out, The Road Back to You, which I think is the book you got introduced to. Because I think that's what Pear used.
Yep.
And it was like all of a sudden something opened up inside of me. Well, I know when I first did it, and the staff at Zion can attest to this, the first thing, it's almost like a party trick, right? I bet you're thinking this, and all of a sudden you're labeling people.
That's scary. Yeah.
And because it's fun, but the more that you grow in the Enneagram, the more that you use it, you realize the type, the number, that's the lie. That's that the reality is I'm actually not a 7. The 7 is the story I've told myself. I'm so much more than that.
So confusing. Like, who are you then?
And this is why for us as a Christian, I need Jesus.
Right. Okay.
Because what the 7 does is when I understand what it means to be a type 7, it means I can go, wait, here's the lie that I believe. And now that I know this lie, instead of making excuses, I can begin to say, where does Jesus want to interact in these? Where does the Holy Spirit want to get a hold of that part of my life? And so let's, like the 3, for instance, the 3, that image management. Now, the healthier you are, you realize, wait, I can't just be about what I do. I have to be more than that. Now, if you remember, I said 3s and 7s can look very similar. Well, one of the reasons is there's what's called a 1-to-1 or a sexual 3. It's a subtype. And the sexual or 1-to-1 3, they're all about presenting what they think it looks like to be a masculine or feminine and presenting it to the world. So whatever you think it looks like to be the ideal woman, that's what you want to present. Well, that also, they're very energetic. They love experiences, especially experiences they succeed in, because that bolsters that identity. And then which is very similar to the 7, because the 7 loves experiences, but for very different reasons. The 3 likes all the experiences because they're opportunities to succeed, to add to kind of their the collective sense of who they are, their accomplishments.
Something to post on Facebook.
That's right. Yeah. Whereas the 7 loves the experience because it's a way to avoid pain or it's something new.
Yeah, that's probably a driver too. One that, hopefully I've been able to identify and watch, but that's under there somewhere. And
that's where when the 3 is healthy, or when that's not actually, I don't like to use the word healthy. I get stuck in that regularly. Let's use security or stress. When the 3 is in security, the 3 actually goes to what's called the type 6, often called the loyalist or the buddy number. And instead of their success, they want to see other people succeed.
Oh, Lord.
And they're driven by that. In fact, the more that other people succeed, that feeds their sense of, wow, look what I've accomplished, which pours into that.
That's so crazy. You make it sound so negative.
Well, no, it's a very positive thing.
Rainbows and unicorns.
But when a three's in stress,
Yeah.
the three goes to what's called the type 9. And what the three in stress does, the type 9, they fall asleep to themselves, and so they work themselves harder because they have to achieve. And in fact, sometimes threes will work themselves to the point of exhaustion, and then all of a sudden they just shut down.
Huh. Do they ever wear the same pair of leggings for 4 or 5 days in a row?
Only if people aren't watching.
Well, they're not. Okay. I'm using that as a distraction. Yeah, that could be.
Does that seem to ring true?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not one to just go and like veg out. Like I go and like produce good work.
There's always got to be something to produce, right?
I don't know. Like, I don't know. Stuff. I can see it. Like there's a lot of stuff that I can feel underneath that feels like truth and where I want to be vulnerable with it,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure.
And that's again, my job as I don't know what you are. And so the more that you can dig and start to be honest and uncover those things, that's when you start getting to the core self. Because the real thing is what Jesus wants the three to know is that they are not loved because of what they do.
Mm-hmm.
They're loved because of who they are. And that they can get past the lie of that their only value is in being successful or in how they perform or produce.
Right.
That's where the beauty of it comes in. And so one of the other things that's helpful when we talk about the heart being in the heart triad, threes sometimes can be out of touch with their emotions because the emotions get in the way of achievement. It doesn't mean they're not emotionally aware. Now, here's the other side of this.
So emotional.
And this doesn't mean they're not emotional. And this is why this is important, because remember, we're not just threes, we're layered. So
Sure.
you have all these other components to yourself. And we want to be careful not to just stereotype and say, well, threes are all they do is work, or all they do is care about image. No, you're so much more than that. But that's the motivation. It's the motivation that's the driver. It's not just the behaviors.
Right.
And so an emotional three, of course there's an emotion. Like 8s are emotional, 7s are emotional. All of them have access to it. But you're part of that emotional center. And so there's a different connection there. So tell me what you're thinking so far. How is this connecting with you?
Well, I think it is connecting. I think I would like to hear more about the 7 because I think there are pieces,
Yep.
That could fit me as well. And then honestly, I don't know. Like I don't know. I don't even know the other types. So
Well, so you want to go through a couple of the other ones?
yeah, but honestly, like you telling me the story, like why did you start, living water, and I told you why. And then if I were to tell you why I started the Inspire Collective, like you would nail me as a 3, because I'm at this point where it's like, okay, I'm 47 and I feel the most free I've felt my entire life, emotionally, physically, spiritually. I feel like I'm such a good place. And so now it's called the Inspire Collective for a reason. I want to inspire women to find the same sort of freedom. My purpose is to bring hope, freedom, and to teach women a new way, but I think about that, like, is it for, like, when you say as a 3, like, is it for me or is it for them? Like, I truly, honestly believe like this is what God has me doing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like a selfish motivation, but I do get really excited when other people experience healing. Like, it's just like, that's why I do what I do.
And let's be careful. Let's be careful not to say that there's negatives to 3. There's negatives to all the numbers, but there's a lot of positives. And the beauty of each type, because we believe our personality is a gift. Now, if you're unhealthy, like if you're an unhealthy 3 or an unhealthy 7 or any of the other ones, then it's all about you. And in fact, you'll use other people to become successful. But as you become,
I've done that.
See,
like early on, absolutely.
So share what you want to say about that. I don't want to get too personal if you don't want to, but you just said that you've used other people to get success.
Yeah, I think like early on in my career, it was like when people started, doing well or experiencing healing, it was like, I did something good, or like this was like, I could tell it like pumped me up in a completely different way than it does now. Just what I've learned, like with the Christian counseling, and it's the Lord's work and it's not my work. I abide in him and he does it all for me. Like, it's almost like the glory goes to God now.
Yeah.
And I just get to be like the conduit of that.
And
Early in my career, when I was younger, for sure.
and that's the part of the health and the growth.
Healed, restored. Okay, not really like that.
No,
but,
I get it.
Just like, yeah, you got me.
Yeah, and that's the part where I would say, instead of looking at just the negative, so often it's easy to see the dark side of every number. Why we need 3s or 7s, and again, we can go through all the different ones, but I think there are ones we could pretty safely say you're not, right? But let's continue with the 3 a little bit, just because we've had some conversation around it.
Well, the motivation seems right.
The motivation seems right. Okay.
I think about myself as a little girl and a teen, the image protector, and even how I've grown. Like, it sounds right.
Do you find when you get stressed, is your tendency to bury yourself in work or to avoid work?
Oh gosh, I'm so good at being lazy. Like I said, I've worn the same pants for like 3 days. I don't know. I don't know that either. Like, I'd really have to think about it.
Yeah.
Okay, wait. Ask the question again.
Yeah, when you get stressed.
For some reason, I'm picturing my husband right now. Okay,
Yeah,
I get you.
When you get stressed, is your tendency to bury yourself deeper into work or to become lazy?
I clean my house when Joe and I get into arguments, and I clean the house, and I get all busy, and I go for a run. Yeah.
Yep. And then when that happens, now this is what's helpful, because again, there are levels of stress. What happens when you get to the point of your breaking point? What happens when you hit that point where you're done producing, where you've done too much? What happens then in you?
I cry and we make up. I don't know. I really live a very balanced life. I don't feel like I ever let myself get there. Like, balance is my best friend.
How about 20 years ago?
20 years ago. Okay, ask the question again. I'll put myself there.
20 years ago, when you hit stress, when you got to the point of stress, when you had enough, what happened?
Probably tried to please people more.
Yeah.
Worked harder.
You work harder, and there's the key word, is the working harder. So I think a 3 would be a reasonable thing. Another thing that we'll utilize to help us kind of understand and why 3s and 7s can be very similar is 3s and 7s are part of the same stance. Now, stances, there are, just like there's 3 triads, there's emotional centers or intelligence centers, sorry. Stances are how we approach the world. And 3s, 7s, and 8s are a part of what's called the assertive or aggressive stance.
Oh, dang.
Okay, and what this means is, for an 8, let's start with an 8. We'll go through them, 8, 7, and 3. Okay, an 8, nothing's going to get in their way. They're going to bowl through anything that comes at them, right? And they're kind of aggressively aggressive, or assertively aggressive. Let's say it that way. 7s, what 7s will do in pain is they withdraw, but they aggressively withdraw. So when things go bad, they want to go to somewhere else. When 3s when 3s go into aggressive, nothing's going to get in their way of achieving.
Yeah, that's me.
Okay.
Even if it's cleaning my house.
Okay.
Or communicating an issue to death with my husband.
So over-explaining?
Yeah.
All right.
We're going to fix this. We are going to work through this, Joe.
Ben, do we have any questions that have come in so far?
We do have a few. The first one comes from Molly. Towards the beginning, you guys were talking like there's a 3 or a 7. I myself bounce between 3 and 7 a lot based on behavior.
You mean you yourself, Ben, not Molly?
Oh, sorry. Me, myself, Ben bounced a lot between 3 and 7. We have a question here from Molly and asking, what are some other common mistypes? And what are going to be some of those distinguishing factors between those common mistypes?
Well, that's not a big question. The question essentially is, are there other mistypes? So what type of common mistypes? Well, I think there's a couple ones. Because 3s are so connected with 2s, because 2 is the wing of the 3. If you have a 3 with a high 2 wing, they may look like a helper. You also have 3, which is connected to the 4, and the 4s are often called the individualist or the romantic. They long to be seen as unique or special. They're looking for their place in the world, and they want to be seen. And sometimes 3s can look like that, especially in levels of health. I think if we could go into whole subtype issues, each of the subtypes brings a different one with it. If you have a 3 who's in constant stress, so let's say someone's in a time of stress in their life where everything's falling apart, right? And when that happens, they're naturally leaning on their 9 in stress. So they might actually start to look a lot like the 9, even to the point of being lethargic, where they just give up, where they just want to stop doing stuff because they're so tired of performing all the time. But that's a real unhealthy point. Just like they can also look like 6s. 3s can look like 8s at times because of the aggressiveness. So when 3s aggressively are pursuing to get through goals, especially when 3s are, if they're not aware of the fact that they're going about their business trying to get something done, sometimes those around them will feel like they're uncaring or that they're just pushing through. I mean, that's not all 3s, but so there's several different mistypes that can happen in 3s. But I think what helps to distinguish, and this is the key for you, and I would say anybody, is getting to the motivation of what the 3 is. Because for the 3, the motivation comes down to, again, is I have to appear, I'm loved by my success. I'm loved because of what I do. I found, and as a child, let's say it's a childhood wound. Sometimes it's just a childhood story. It's funny, as I've walked with people they came from great homes. And like, I don't have any wounds from my childhood. My parents were awesome. And that's why I stopped saying childhood wound, because wound always makes it sound like it's damaging. Whereas the story, and this is the narrative part, all of us tell stories to ourselves, and those stories affect us.
Right.
And those stories are what can cause us damage, regardless of how great our home was. And so the story, if it's the wound of the 3, let's say they grew up in a home where they were praised because they got A's, and they got love and care and affection whenever they performed well or they achieved well. So that's what they learned. But here's the thing, and this is where some would disagree in formation of personality. I don't think those wounds created your personality. I think they revealed it.
That's interesting. I was going to ask that question too. Like in counseling, like we want to go back and heal the individual, so where did the Enneagram start, and who are they once they're healed? Is there always like a core personality, or is there some ideal that people want to come to? Like, did God really create us all with 9 personalities?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I would say that we all have one core personality that is fixed. However, it can be refined. And our job, the goal of the Enneagram is to help us get past the lies so that we can learn and embrace the other numbers. But let's go back to personality formation and how stories reveal your personality. I don't think they create it. So you could have 3, we could have 3 people.
Say that again.
Yeah. Your stories revealed your personality. They did not create it.
Okay, I disagree.
Okay, that's good. Let's talk.
As a therapist,
So
your story dictates who you are. Your programming dictates who you are, and your programming comes from everything that's been typed into your brain since the day you were born.
Okay, so now let me explain. So let me explain what I mean by this, because I think we might be on the same page. Okay, so the idea of the Enneagram is that we could have 3 people who are all raised in the same environment. Let's say same parents treated them the same way. Now, I know that's impossible.
I get you.
How they heard, how they received and experienced their parents reveals their personality. So we could all have this.
Yeah.
That's the story. So my parent says, so for instance, you have a parent who says, if you don't get A's, you're not loved.
Right.
As a 3, you're going to go, well, I have to perform to be loved. As a 1, I should go, well, it wasn't good that I didn't get an A, so I need to be good. As a 7, I'll go, oh, then screw it, I'm going to get Fs.
Okay, I get it. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. But what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Well, and I would say
perfectly.
So biblically, and again, I'm just going off of biblically.
Well, it's an issue. Okay.
I would say that the personality, if there was no sin, our personality is a gift from God because it always points us back to God.
It would be God.
When it's done well, our personality, all the attributes, all the good things of the Enneagram, excuse me, point us back to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right?
Sure.
But sin gets in, and sin is what twists it. And how I perceive that typing that was done to me, that reveals what my personality type is.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. So like we are all supposed to, like, our identity is in Christ. Christ created us for his glory, and, we're supposed to be on this journey of sanctification where we want to become more like Jesus.
That's right.
How does the Enneagram fit? Like, does it take us off course?
So now I feel like you're interviewing me.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I would say the Enneagram, I think Jesus was all of them. I think if you look at the Enneagram, Jesus was dead center.
Okay. That helps.
I think that's my personal, because when we look at the story of the Gospels, we see elements where Jesus acts like a 1, a healthy 1, acts like a healthy 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? All right. Any other questions, Ben, come through?
Yeah, we did have one about spiritual formation specifically, but then also a question from Ethan. He's wondering if you can dig in a little bit more to subtypes and discuss the differences between them.
Okay.
I think it's Ethan Ballum. Is it Ethan Ballum?
It is Ethan Ballum. That's a mutual friend of ours. Yeah. Hi, Ethan. We love you. So subtypes, if you picture the brain, okay, so if I had a picture of the brain up, you would have this little center back here, right, which is kind of the reptilian part of the brain. Your subtype is the unconscious motivation that drives you, and there are 3 primary subtypes that impact your personality.
Okay. We're getting deep.
Now we're getting deep, right? Okay, so the first one is self-preservation, social, and then sexual. Now I'm gonna do a really poor job
Steve.
I'm gonna do a really poor job, or not poor job. It's a good job, but I'm gonna minimalize it. It's gonna be very generic, right? Okay, so imagine for a moment if we had a fire hose. Okay, so self-preservation, it's capped the water. No water is getting out. It's protecting all the sources of water that it has. Social, it's a wide stream. It's going to spray everybody possible. It's going to impact as many people as it can. Sexual or one-to-one is like a direct stream, okay? So in your personality, each type has a social, self-preservation, and sexual, and you have what's called stacking. One is higher than the other, and whatever the highest one in is the most unconscious, meaning it drives you and you don't even realize it.
Oh, that's tough.
So now, here's why this can get so complicated, is now you not only have 9 personality types, you actually have 27 personality types.
Oh,
and
sure.
Each personality type has what's called a counter type. Because the counter type means you don't look like what a normal type would look. So I'll use me as a 7 as an example. The counter type of the 7 is the 2. As a social 7, because normally 7s are about their own experiences. I tend to care about everybody else's first.
Mm-hmm. Are you a social 7?
I am a social 7.
Okay.
And you would fit within what's called, I think, based on our conversation, you might be what's called the sexual 3. 1-to-1. We don't like the word sexual sometimes, but it just means it means it's that masculine, feminine form.
I was thinking more social, but maybe.
Well, no. So this is where the stacking comes in. Because you have access to the other ones. And then the third one is the most repressed, that honestly it shows up, but you rarely see it.
Okay.
And so if you were to stack, you might be social, 1-to-1, self-preservation. Right? And each of the numbers, and we don't have time to go through all those today. And I think maybe we'll dedicate a whole episode just to talking about some of the different subtypes, because it's a really intriguing thing.
Yeah.
This is also why, Melissa, when you were like, well, I don't want to just be pegged as a number, you are so much more than your Enneagram type. The Enneagram type just helps you get to the motivations, because when you understand your motivations, then you can say, wait, where does Jesus interact into this? Where's my motivation derailing me? So can I ask you a question? When have you found that your motivations have derailed you from what you knew God wanted or that we're supposed to be? And you don't have to get super personal, but I'm curious if you have experiences on that.
Probably like teen years, 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to think of specifics. Say it again. Say the question one more time.
Were there times when your motivations derailed you, when you weren't aware of your motivation and ended up causing harm for you or others?
Okay. Yeah, I got you. Okay. More recently, or not more recently, but right when I was trying to figure out like what I was going to do for living water. And up until probably 6 years ago, like it really was, okay, so all ministry is good. And I wanted to be involved in all these different ministries. And it was this real, an unbalance between honoring God first, husband second, family third. And so I've done a lot of work, not even 6 years, I've done a lot of work over the past like 12 years to really put that in line. Like I need to put my family first. So you can imagine like as someone who's a helper, someone who feels called to like bring healing, like, and probably feeling accomplished by that, I wanted to spend a whole lot of time like healing others rather than focusing on myself. So that's probably the biggest sin issue.
And that's a perfect example. So for the 3, and especially if you're a 3, that tendency to achieve is you might actually lose the people that you have to care for, or even your own self-care.
Yes.
And that's where the motivation. So if you understand your motivation is achievement or being defined by what you do, what you accomplish, once you're aware of that, you then can submit that and say, wait, what is the truth? How is this hurting my family? How is this hurting me?
Yeah, that's a huge thing I went through. I had to, definitely work through that and have accountability, for years to say, okay, nothing new.
Yeah.
For however long, and it's not like I wasn't ministering to my family or I haven't been a good wife, but my motivation was definitely outside of my home rather than inside of my home.
Yeah.
Until I had my 3rd and I was forced to be home.
So there was a forcing. Something happened when Axton was born.
I think that was a season, that God had me in, a season of reevaluation, and, it's not working full time and, taking care of 450 students and, finding value in that. It was like, I got 3 students of my own in my home that I need to be ministering to. And so that was a real shift for me when I stayed home with Axton.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. I think we have time for one more question. Do we have any other questions, Ben?
We don't have other questions right now, but you did get some affirmation on doing some more about subtypes in the future. And Melissa, everyone thinks you're great. They love you.
That's because you're a 3 too. Also.
So here's what I would encourage you to do, and you and I can talk offline or another time. There are some great resources on 3s. I would encourage you to explore other numbers. But again, remember the goal of the Enneagram is getting to the motivation. And often we'll get thrown in the weeds because we're like, well, I do this. Well, doing is a behavior. It's why you do it is the issue.
That's so helpful. Yeah. And I think it's pretty clear that that's what it is. Like I'm trying to think, even younger, why did I start, Living Water? Why did I start the Inspire Collective? And trying to think even younger, like as a teenager, what was it that I did to look successful? And it probably was identity things.
Well, and I remember when you and I were working through and I wanted you to teach, the language that you used was more of fear of, well, what if I'm not good enough?
Yeah, people are going to judge me. Like, I don't want to be a leader because if I'm a leader, then people can say that I'm wrong. If I'm going to be preaching, I don't want people not to like me or not to think that. But I said the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Also, it looks like we do have...
Now I don't care. Like, I really don't care.
and that's actually, that sounds really bad. A healthy place to be is the point when you don't find your identity in other people.
Right. And their opinions. Yeah. I'm free of that.
All right. It looks like we did have another question. Yeah.
We did just have one come in. This one is from Jenna, and she's asking, can your parents' Enneagram cause you to exhibit behaviors that make you look like another number? The idea, how do your parents' personality affect your personality?
Okay, so let's start off. I'd love, if you're okay, I'd love to hear your response as a therapist. I know what the Enneagram response would be. I want to hear what your response as a therapist would be.
So I'm going to have you repeat it again.
So I'll summarize it. How does your parents' personality or the possibility of their Enneagram type influence your behavior or your personality type?
So from a counseling perspective, 100%. Like, I'm talking about like we are programmed a certain way. So everything that's been typed into our brain, like our brain is literally like a computer. It only knows what you tell it. it only knows what you teach it, so everything that's been typed in from zero. Now, don't get me wrong, we all have Jesus, and you haven't ruined your children. I've been assured of that many. You're not or other people's children, but yeah, that it's just we program. And yes, there are other influences and stuff like that, but I would say that it really does affect. Now, I know what you're going to say, and I agree with you that personality is already their personality. It's that they are going to respond in a certain way. Can you tell that part? Because I'm new to that, but that makes sense.
Yeah. So Jenna, to answer your question,
forget all the work I've done.
So Jenna, to answer your question, what I would say is simply this. Your personality type is there. However, from an adaptive strategy, I think you are going to be influenced by your parents' Enneagram to some degree. That doesn't change your motivation. It might change your behavior, and it might also muddy some of the motivation because, and this is, I think, part of the work of therapy, is we can transfer the beliefs and the behaviors of other people and put it onto us. And vice versa, we can do that to other people. And I think with our parents and Enneagram, and I so appreciate you saying this, Melissa, because I think it's so important for people to hear. You can be the greatest parent in the world, but you're not perfect.
Oh my gosh, I've messed up so much. Yeah.
And that's why I don't like the language of the childhood wound.
Yeah.
Because there were some bad parents, right? But the childhood wound, I think it's better to say the story. But let's say if you're raised with an 8 or a 1 or a 4 or any number, let's just not even pick, let's just say any number. In order to survive in that, you may learn to adapt, or there might be certain behaviors that you locked into.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
But that it's getting, for your part, is to get to the motivation, because even the reason why you may have locked into certain behaviors might be because of your motivation as your Enneagram type. And so if you're a 2, 2s are sometimes called helpers, givers. And let's say they have a parent who's, let's say a very healthy 6, a very fear-based 6, because 6s are rooted in the fear triad, the head triad. And you might have a parent who is overwhelmingly protective of you because they're rooted in their 6ness, right? Well, you as a 2, in order to help, now all of a sudden you start living in that fear as well, or you might start looking for things in order to help to connect because you feel like you have to give. So I think the answer is yes, I think there is influence, but your personality type wasn't given to you by your parents, but it did shape you. And your personality, your Enneagram type is shaped by what's around you, but the core motivation is still there. And that's why all of us look different. We can have, we have Ben who's a 3, Melissa, who we weren't sure is a 3 or 7. I think we're pretty dialed in, you're a 3.
Ben's my favorite.
Ben's your favorite. We could have 5 other 3s, and they all would look different. But if we got to the core motivation, the motivation would still be very similar.
Yeah. And can I say something about like how we affect our children?
Yeah, please.
Like I'm thinking as you're speaking, like, wow, that is so true. So if my motivation is, a 3 is what we've talked about, like that really is it can affect my children. And we lose sight of like who they need to be or what their number is. Yeah. I'm thinking about even recently some things that, that I currently do that's like, come on, like, let's do this. Like, let's use our mindset. Like, let's, and that's not their motivation. It's completely different. So I think it's really important. Well, you tell me, like, the work when you figure out yourself and know who you are, it's got to be really helpful if you also can start to understand your children so that you're not putting your personality type onto your children. And
also one of the things I strongly advise is be careful not to type your children, because children are still figuring out who they are.
Okay, that's a good point.
And children will naturally try and please their parents and their peers because they're figuring out their identity. Now, I'll tell you, I'm pretty sure I know what my daughter is, but I don't want to tell her that because I don't want to put her in a box that, no kidding. I don't want to put her in a box that she thinks she needs to be in. Oh, yeah. Now, that being said, I have an idea, and because I think she's this, I try and parent her there. But I also want to make sure, just like in my marriage, and I'll end with this, in our marriages, when I understand my wife's motivation, I can have compassion, but it also allows us to communicate because we just think differently. What drives us is different. Melissa, it was so great to have you on. I'm so grateful for you.
I enjoyed it, of course.
Awesome. Well, hey, I would encourage you guys, if you want to check out, especially if you're in Minnesota, Living Water Christian Counseling does phenomenal work. I can attest to it because I've done work, not counseling work, but alongside with her. She's an amazing counselor. The Inspire Collective is wonderful stuff. Ladies, please check that out. I'm so grateful to have you here, Melissa.
I'm grateful to be here, Jason. Thank you. I feel so like I'm excited and I'm interested in finding out more. So thank you, because it will definitely help the work that I do.
Awesome. Hey, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, the goal of the Enneagram is not to peg you. It's not to say you're this. It's to help you get past that. It's to help you really get to the gift of who you really are. Thank you so much for joining us, and God bless. Thanks for tuning in.